But I couldn't help but think how fitting it was that today is Earth Day, since as you can see, the title of our message is, Has Science Eliminated the Need for God? How fitting and how appropriate that the title of our message would be that, particularly today on Earth Day, and I didn't even know that that was actually the case. So to start our teaching this morning, we do have a video that we have for you, but before we get into that, I'd like to kind of ask you to imagine with me an imaginary story. Imagine if after the service today, as many of us do, let's say that you have plans to go visit one of your friends in the city, and you just get together, maybe even with family members, to enjoy Sunday. You have lunch together. I know that's really common for us, a lot of our families. So imagine if after service today, you go get your kids, you guys gather your things, and then you leave church, and you go to your friend's house. He's getting a barbecue ready for you guys. He's preparing the food. He's getting everything ready. But then he tells you, you know that I'm an atheist. I'm not a Christian like you are, and so of course I haven't been at church like you have. Since today's Earth Day, while I was here at the house getting the barbecue ready and just waiting for you guys, I had my TV turned on. And since it's Earth Day, they're running all kinds of documentaries on the Nature Channel, on the Discovery Channel, you know, documentaries about evolution, about Charles Darwin, and really just about science in general. And I really have a question for you, your friend would ask you. He would say, has science eliminated the need for God? Because I saw this interview today with Richard Dawkins, you know, the guy that used to be the professor of biology at Oxford University. This guy is one of the most famous atheists around the globe, and I saw this interview with him, and he seems to think that. Is that really true? And then he would sit you down in front of his TV, and he would show this video to you.
Here he is, Richard Dawkins. Nice to see you, man. How are you today? You know, before we start, and I think this is something that you don't hear a lot about, and just to be clear for people, the book is called The God Delusion, but it isn't just about the Judeo-Christian God. I think, and you go to links in the beginning of this book to talk about how it's the term that encompasses anything. So whichever version of a God or deity you believe in, monotheistic or polytheistic, whatever, you're talking about all of them, right? Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. So, right off the bat, what's wrong with, in your opinion, with believing in a God, regardless of who the God is?
I think it's false. I think that it's a matter of belief without evidence. And as a scientist and as an educator, I like the idea that we believe things because there's evidence. There's such a lot of evidence available now at the beginning of the 21st century that it's a real shame, it's a tragedy to base your life upon something for which there is no evidence and never was any evidence, when the real truth is so wonderful.
Well, I suspect that the argument they would make is that because it's absurd, that's why it's faith, right? That if it was evidentiary, you would require no faith and it would be fact, and that would be missing the point of religion.
That's absolutely right, but that's not a point in its favor, is it?
Well, you know, it's whatever gets you through the night, isn't it, ultimately?
Well, no, I mean, for me, what matters is the truth.
The scientific truth.
What other truth is there when we're talking about the universe, when we're talking about the nature of life? Of course, there are other sorts of truths like moral truths, or maybe they're not truths at all, but they're not scientific. But I think if we're talking about the universe, about what reality is, about what life is, then truth means scientific truth, yes.
You know, this...
So what would you say to your friend after he showed you a video like that? Did you hear what Professor Dawkins said? He said, what matters to me is the truth. And then he says, do you mean scientific truth? And his response was, what other kind of truth is there? When you talk about the universe, when you're talking about living systems and all this, when you look at the world around us, that's really the only reliable form of truth, is what he would say. So again, just imagine yourself at your friend's house, your family's house, after a Sunday, a barbecue. He says, I've been watching this all day. How do you respond to that? Is Richard Dawkins right? Has science eliminated the need for God? Now, maybe you've already seen a lot of shows like this. And if you haven't, well, it's probably just because you might be watching the Christian channels on your TV. Because if you do watch Discovery, if you watch the Nature Channel or National Geographic or anything like this at all, and most of our children are not homeschooled. Most of our kids are in just regular schools. Even if they're in a Christian school, it's a very good chance that your Christian students, your Christian children, are using secular science books in their Christian school. So maybe it wouldn't be you that would be confronted with this, but maybe it would be your teenage high school son. Maybe he would come home and he would say, Dad, help me with this. This is confusing to me because you've raised us in a godly home. I do believe the Bible, Dad. I mean, you've taught me the scriptures and so forth, but Dad, this is some interesting stuff here. There does seem to be a lot of scientific support from what Richard Dawkins is saying. Dad, has science eliminated the need for God? Or what about if you're on the street and let's say you come up to somebody, you're sharing your faith, and he says, I really think Christianity is interesting. I think it's fascinating, but I love science. Is it true that science and the scriptures are not compatible? Is it true that faith and reason are two separate categories? Is it true, like this man said, that that's why Christians believe it by faith, because it's absurd? It can't be proven by evidence. It can't be verified through proof. That's what makes it faith, because it's absurd. How would you respond to that? So we'd like to answer that question this morning. And as I said in Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18, Paul the Apostle actually addresses this. It might surprise you, or maybe it wouldn't surprise you, that over 2,000 years ago, this same problem was going on. Paul the Apostle, when he was writing this letter to the Roman Christians, even in his day, he was confronting this issue, that people were saying that there really is no good, visible proof, evidence of God's existence, of God's reality, of the truth of the Christian faith. And so Paul actually writes about people who, like Richard Dawkins, deny what's very plainly in front of them in the natural world and what we would call science. Let's read this together in verse 18. I'm reading from the New King James. Paul says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, because God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made." And then he gives you two examples. Even his eternal power and his Godhead. In other words, that God actually exists and he's all-powerful. So that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, and neither were they thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image, made into like corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now you have to remember, Paul's writing to Romans 2,000 years ago, and the Roman civilization was engaged in all kinds of lewd sexual behavior. So this is what he's describing. Verse 25, "Who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." So as you can see, Paul the Apostle dealt in that day with the very same issue that we are dealing with today. Science is not a new phenomenon. Modern science is its own particular study, but this idea of people looking at the natural world and claiming that there is absolutely no evidence, nothing that would point to an all-powerful God, nothing that would point to an infinite creator, nothing that would help us think there's anything in the universe that's real other than what we can touch. This is an ancient problem. Even before Paul, 500 years before Paul, Plato and Aristotle, who were both God believers, they also combated this lie of these atheistic Greek philosophers. So this problem has been going on for such a long time. Let me read the same verses to you again in a different translation, the New Living Translation, because it brings it out in a different sense. "But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them." And now he's going to tell you, how has God made the truth about himself obvious? Because ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. And through everything God has made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. In other words, there was like an intellectual awareness of God, but morally in their heart, they refused to acknowledge and to follow God with their life. But it was obvious to them. He says, they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. And as a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshiped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. And so God abandoned them. to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. And as a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie. So this issue, guys, of what does science have to say about the Christian faith, about the existence of God, it's been imported all throughout history, but especially in the day and age in which we live. We'll talk about this in a second. Science is being exalted as the ultimate form of truth. And actually, in a lot of cases, people like Richard Dawkins will tell you that science is the only reliable form of truth. If you cannot touch it, taste it, weigh it, or quantify it, it is not true. And we'll discover today that that idea doesn't make any sense at all. But this is extremely important. It's been important in the past, but especially so today. I'd like to give you 3 quick reasons why it's really important for you as a Christian, whether you're a father or a mother, even if you're a teenager, to have a good answer. You know, is it really necessary? Do we need to have answers for people like this? Maybe we should just believe what we believe and just let them believe what they believe and just call it square. But there's at least 3 good reasons I can think of why we need to have an answer, good answers for these good questions. Number 1, it's biblically commanded. Did you know the Bible actually commands us to be ready to give an answer for questions like this? These deep, fundamental questions that people have about life, about death, about heaven and hell and God and all of this, the Bible commands you, not suggests, commands me to be able to give at least a reasonable answer. 1 Peter 3:15 is the cornerstone verse for this type of thinking. Peter the apostle, he says, always be ready to give an answer, to give a defense for anyone who asks you of a reason of the hope that's within you. And this, of course, this word in Greek for giving an answer or giving a defense is the Greek word apologia, from which we get the word apologetics. It just means to give a defense, to give a rational explanation for something. But that's not the only verse. That word apologia, to make a reasonable defense, an argument, a presentation, it's used 18 times in the New Testament. 18 times apologia is used. In Jude verse 3, Jude tells us to contend for the faith, to fight for our faith, to make a strong presentation of the accuracy of Christianity. That's Jude, the half-brother of Jesus. Paul the apostle in Philippians 1:16, he said about himself, I am set for the defense of the gospel. Paul was constantly defending the truth of the Christian faith, whether it was before Roman emperors or before Greek philosophers in Athens. Paul the apostle knew that there was a marketplace of ideas and Christianity was competing to be received as the truth. He says, I am set for the defense of the truth of the gospel. Colossians 4:5, Paul tells us to know how to answer every man. Know how to give an answer to people that ask you. In 2 Corinthians 10, verses 4 through 5, one of my favorites, Paul the apostle says that the weapons we have as Christians are not carnal, physical weapons, but they're spiritual. And you know what he says those spiritual weapons are to be used for? He says tearing down and demolishing arguments and ideas that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. If there's ever a day where those type of spiritual weapons that God has made available to us should be applicable, it is today. The kind of culture that we live in today, there are so many ideas and philosophies and worldviews that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. But one of the main tools God has given you and me are spiritual weapons to pull those things down. And as Paul said, bring these thoughts captive to the obedience of the truth of Christ. And then even beyond that, there's numerous Old and New Testament examples of prophets or apostles or even Jesus himself doing things to help people understand the truth of his message. Can you ever remember Jesus once doing something so that people would believe his message was the truth? Did he ever say anything like that? I can think of just a couple of examples. In John 14, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? And then later on, he talks to Philip, I believe it was, and he says, Philip, how can you still not understand that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? And then you know what he said? He said, but Philip, if you don't believe my words, at least believe my miracles. At least look at the evidence of my miracles as a verification of the truth of my message. So Jesus himself, there's actually a great book called The Apologetics of Jesus by Dr. Norman Geisler, and he appealed to miracles. Jesus appealed to prophecy. Jesus appealed to so many things. The resurrection from the dead was the ultimate sign for what? that people could know beyond the shadow of a doubt that his words are true. If you believe without seeing, Jesus says you're blessed, but not everybody is like that. Thomas wasn't like that, and God knows that people need verification. Yesterday, I was at a friend's house. I was at Edgar and Cynthia's house, and we had a fascinating experience. We were just there, and we had dinner and coffee, and I walk in the house, and we're just looking forward to hanging out with Edgar and Cynthia and just spend some time with them. And Edgar comes up to me, and he says, "Hey, Jason, I have these Mormons that come by my house, and I think they're going to come by today. You want to talk to them?" I said, "Edgar, I really don't want to talk to Mormons today. I just like to hang out with you guys, and we had flan and cafe and spaghetti. It was awesome, and I just wanted to hang out with them." But sure enough, about 2 hours later, the Mormons came, right? And you're not going to believe where this guy was from. So I stayed inside the house, and I was like, "Lord, I don't want to mess up," because Edgar's a really, really nice guy. He's very friendly. He's very mellow, and he's been having a really good interaction with these two Mormon young missionaries. And I was like, "Lord, I don't want to mess this up." But then I got a text message on my phone, and it said something, I can't remember the scripture exactly, but it said something to the effect of, opening up your mouth, sharing the truth about the Lord, and Father, help us to reach out to people. And I was like, "Okay, Lord, I guess." So I just walk out there, and we just start talking, and we talked for probably about an hour and a half. And you're not going to believe it, but I said, "Hey, man, where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Idaho." And I said, "You're joking." I said, "What city you're from?" And he says, "Boise." And I said, "You're kidding me, man." I said, "The people in my church are going to go nuts because I always joke with these guys that everyone thinks I'm Mormon too." I walk outside the church in a dress shirt with a tie and a Bible. Forget it. I'm the Mormon. But so my point is that a Mormon, see, he would come to you, and we asked these guys multiple times, "Why do you believe the Mormon gospel?" It's a different gospel, and they have a different Bible. It's a different Jesus. And he says, "Well, because God has shown it to me that it's true. Because I know that God has shown this to me to be true." Now, the Mormons call that the burning bosom, like the pecho quebrante, the burning bosom. And I said, "Okay, I know that's the burning bosom, right? That's what you're talking about, like God, you think God has given you a witness in your heart." And I said, "Okay, but let me ask you again. How do you know that was God?" "Well, I know. Okay, but how do you know? How do you know?" Because I've gotten the burning bosom too. I've gotten it from pepperoni pizza. I've gotten it from the Holy Spirit. I've gotten it from my own human spirit. And I says, and you also have to be careful because that could even be from a demonic spirit. How do you know? And so they might come and ask you the same type of questions. And so that's why we have to be ready. That's why the Bible commands us to be ready to give an answer. Are we going to be just like the Mormons? Is that all we can say? Do we not think that it's valuable enough and important enough to be able to just lovingly help people understand the truth of Christianity? It could change their destiny. And are we like them and all we say is, "Well, I just know that it's true"? Because that doesn't convince a guy like me. And there's many other people that are like that. It's biblically commanded, number one. Number two, it's culturally demanded. Today's culture is secular, naturalistic, and relativistic. They demand good reasons for believing in Jesus. What do those words mean? Well, secular means you extract from the society all references to God. Is that happening in our society? Absolutely. It's happening slowly in Puerto Rico, but it's happening, folks. It's already done in Europe. It's almost finished in Canada. It's progressively happening in America, and it will soon become stronger in Puerto Rico. Our society is secular. Our society is, for the most part, naturalistic. What does that mean? Well, instead of supernatural, they just believe in natural things. There is nothing that exists that's not physical. So all these things you Christians believe in, like spirit beings, angels, the soul, that doesn't exist. Those are just chemicals. Your thoughts and all those things that you think are floating around somewhere. Come on. Science is the true avenue of apprehending truth about the universe. They believe in naturalism. They only believe that the things in the universe that are real are things you can touch and taste and weigh and quantify. And relativistic, this is relativism. Oh, you know what that is. What's true for you is true for you, but it's not true for me. You have your truth, I have my truth. Or the extreme form of relativism is there is no truth. And of course, all you have to do is ask them what question? Is that true? Right? But since this is the kind of culture that we live in today, if we want to be effective, loving witnesses of Jesus, did Paul the Apostle speak people's language? Yes. In 1 Corinthians 9:22, what did Paul say? He said, I seek to become all things to all men, so that by all means I might reach some of them for Jesus. And so Paul tells us, he says, though I am a Jew, when I sit down and talk with a Greek, with a pagan, he says, I kind of am like a pagan. I think along those terms. I use his vocabulary. We see this in Acts 17. Paul talking to the Greek philosophers, he didn't reference the Bible, he referenced philosophical ideas that he knew were true because they're based in God's word and that they would accept. He quoted their authors, their poets. But yet when he talked to the Jews, how did he reach out to the Jews? He quoted prophecy, the Old Testament, because that was their source of authority. See what Paul did? He speaks their language, and he speaks their language. And I'm telling you, not for everybody, but in a lot of instances, if you're talking to a man like Richard Dawkins or one of Dawkins' disciples today, we need to, at least on a certain level, speak their language to be able to make the gospel reasonable and rational. Because after all, if it is the truth, shouldn't we be able to help them understand that? So our culture demands that. It's not simply enough for our culture anymore to say, just believe it. You know, I love Charles Spurgeon. Many of you guys know Charles Spurgeon. He was a beautiful, amazing, powerful, anointed preacher. He went into the ministry at the age of 17, was his first pastorate. I mean, an incredibly anointed man. He's written more books on the Bible than anybody, and he's called the Prince of Preachers. But I got to be honest, there's one quote from Charles Spurgeon that I don't really like. And he said this, he says, defend the Bible? He says, why would you defend the Bible? He says, you don't defend a lion, just let the lion out of its cage. And that sounds really cool, you know? And actually in Charles Spurgeon's day, that was true. That was true. Unleashing the Word of God is, I know what he means by that, and he's right. It's powerful, it will impact, and it does accomplish the purpose that God sends it to. But here's the difference. The culture of Charles Spurgeon, is that the culture we live in today? In the 1800s, they used to publish preachers' sermons in the local newspaper. People, you know, his books sold out to the general public of London because they couldn't wait for the next volume of sermons. Let me ask you, is that the culture of San Juan? Is that the culture of New York City or of Los Angeles or of Amsterdam? No, it's not. And so it's not really enough anymore only to present the Bible. We also should be able to give an answer as to why it can be believed. And third reason, it's not just biblically commanded, culturally demanded, it's also humanly needed. It's a loving thing to share truth with seekers, as Jesus himself showed us in the Gospels. As I said, there are people that they cannot believe without this type of help. They will believe. And I could go on for a long time telling you about dozens and dozens of hardcore atheists, not soft atheists, hardcore atheists, PhD scientists who are on fire believers in Jesus Christ. But you know why? Because somebody loved them enough, a student maybe, or perhaps a fellow professor, to come to them and say, have you ever considered this biological evidence? Have you ever considered this aspect of Scripture and how it's reflected in the natural world? It is true, and I want to help you understand why. It's such a loving thing to do. Not everybody needs it, but I'll tell you what, a lot of folks do. So quickly, there are 5 reasons that science has not eliminated the need for God. 5 reasons I'd like to cover with you this morning. And I do encourage you to get the CD after we're done. I'm going to try not to talk too fast, and I really prayed for the translator this morning because somebody told me that most of the translators hate me. So I'm going to try to be merciful, and I asked her, and at least she doesn't hate me, so I've got one friend in the translator ministry. But 5 reasons that science has not eliminated the need for God. But I do encourage you to get the CD so that you can go through this material slowly at your leisure. And actually, if you want, you can send me an email, and I will email you this entire presentation in a PDF document. So just email me, and I'd love to give it to you, and you can share it with your friends, etc. Number 1, the scientific founding fathers, they were largely Christians and theists. A second reason that science has not eliminated God is scientism. I'll tell you what that means. It's a self-defeating idea. This is the reigning idea in the universities today. It is a self-contradictory idea. And Richard Dawkins holds to this idea, but it actually contradicts itself. Number 3, simple irrelevance. 95% of science has really nothing to do with Christianity and the doctrines of Christian theology. We'll see that. Number 4, there's strong support. The 5% of relevant science that does overlap with Christianity, there is amazing, powerful support for belief in a creator God. And lastly, a single perspective. There are many ways to learn truth about reality. Science is just one of them. So we'll try to cover those. Reason number 1, our scientific founding fathers. Did you know that the vast majority of the founding fathers of the enterprise of modern science, the vast majority of them were Christians, and if they weren't Christians, they were theists. In other words, they believed in a personal God, or a deist. But they believed in God. Did you know that? Let me cruise through some of these gentlemen with you. First off, we have Plato and Aristotle. Now, most people wouldn't think of these guys as scientists, but they actually were 2 of the most early scientists, in addition to being philosophers. 2 of the most influential thinkers in all of human history and pioneers of ancient science both believed strongly in the existence of God. Plato said, God is not the author of all things, but of good only. And Aristotle said, beauty is the gift from God. 500 BC, Plato and Aristotle defeated and they undermined the atheists of their day. Some of the best arguments against atheism today and why it doesn't make any sense at all, guess where they come from? From Plato. Somebody once said that all of Western civilization, all of the ideas and philosophy that we have today are footnotes to Plato. Many of his ideas are not good and they're not Christian because these guys, they weren't saved. They weren't Christians that we know of. But you know what? Many of Plato's ideas are good and they are solid. God did reveal certain things to these gentlemen through their reason, and believing in God was one of them. We next go to Leonardo da Vinci. I'm sure you know of him, the Mona Lisa, right? This prolific artist, inventor, and scientist mentioned in his journals his personal belief in God. He says this, quote, "Disgrace should be represented upside down because all her deeds are contrary to God and tend to hell. If the Lord, who is the light of all things, will enlighten me, I will speak of light. I obey thee, Lord, first for the love that I ought, in all reason to bear thee, and secondly, for that thou canst shorten or prolong the lives of men." So Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest scientific minds in all of history, an obvious believer in God, but in the Christian God. Next, Nicholas Copernicus. This guy lived in the 15th century. This Prussian astronomer, not Russian, but Prussian, they'll get offended if you think they're Russian, responsible for the discovery of heliocentricity, was a devout follower of Christ. Nicholas Copernicus was the man that discovered scientifically, because he loved the Lord and he wanted to understand God's universe, he understood that it is the sun that is at the center of our solar system, that's heliocentricity, and not the earth, that's geocentricity. Nicholas Copernicus, a Christian scientist, discovered this. He says, "I am aware that a philosopher's ideas," and when he says philosopher, he means scientist, "I am aware that a philosopher's ideas are not subject to the judgment of ordinary persons, because it is his endeavor to seek the truth in all things, to the extent permitted to human reason by God." Nicholas Copernicus, a great example of a Christian scientist. And Galileo, his full name is Galileo Galilei. He lived in the 16th century. He was an Italian scientist and Christian. Galileo was responsible for vast improvements in the telescope, pioneering observational astronomy, and he is called by many the father of science and the father of astronomy. Now, Galileo, he said this, quote, "The Bible shows us the way to go to heaven, but not the way the heavens go." In other words, the Bible is true and shows us how to be saved, but it's not meant to be a scientific book per se. It is absolutely scientifically accurate, but he says it doesn't give us all the details of the movements of the planets. He says, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use." And he said, "Mathematics is the language with which God has written the universe." Isaac Newton. He's got kind of a long hairdo, but he's a really great thinker. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton is undoubtedly, perhaps, the greatest scientist to ever have lived. Do a study on Isaac Newton's life. This man was absolutely incredible. Perhaps the greatest scientist to ever live, besides being a dedicated Christian. By the way, did you know that Isaac Newton wrote a commentary on the book of Daniel and a commentary on the book of Revelation? In his scientific work, Newton described universal gravitation, that's gravity. Remember the story of the apple falling upon his head? And the 3 laws of motion, he discovered those. He showed that the motions of the earth and of celestial bodies are governed by the same set of natural laws. They still use Isaac Newton's laws of motion and his celestial mechanics when they launch rockets today at NASA. He built the first practical reflecting telescope, developed a theory of color based on the observation of a prism, and he also formulated an empirical law of cooling, studied the speed of sound, and in mathematics, he shares the credit for the development of differential and integral calculus. I can't even do calculus. Isaac Newton invented it. He said this, he says, "Whence arises all that order and beauty which we see in the world? Does it not appear from phenomena that there is an incorporeal," that means a spiritual, an incorporeal, living, intelligent, omnipresent being? Awesome believer in God, awesome Christian scientist. Louis Pasteur, a man that I greatly admire from the 19th century. This French scientist is credited as being the father of modern medicine and also the father of bacteriology, as well as having discovered the pasteurization process and developing germ theory. So the next time you go to Amigo and you get your $6 gallon of milk and it says pasteurized, guess why it says that? Because Louis Pasteur is the one who discovered the pasteurization process. He also is the reason why many people don't die in the hospital today. Believe it or not, it used to be acceptable for a doctor to be covered with blood and walk from one patient to the next doing surgery. And they wondered why people were dying. And you think that's funny, but the only reason you think it's funny is because you know about what? Germs, bacteria, microbes. They didn't. Guess who discovered them? Louis Pasteur. And he also disproved spontaneous generation, which is necessary for evolution. He said, when one works and imagines and dreams, listen to his hungry intellect. When one works and imagines and dreams of nothing else than the search for answers that God has posed, it is difficult to be so still. What a hungry intellect this man had. And he said, science brings men nearer to God. Francis Bacon lived in the 16th century. This Christian man was an English philosopher, statesman, jurist, author, and scientist. He can lose the collar there, but he was a great scientist, a great man. He is credited for developing what is today known as the scientific method of empirical investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who invented the scientific method was a Christian. His name is Francis Bacon. He said science is only an image of the truth. It's just one side of the truth. Atheism is rather in the lip than in the heart of man. And he said small amounts of philosophy lead to atheism, but larger amounts bring us back to God. And he means science. That's what he's talking about there. Francis Bacon invented the scientific method. Johannes Kepler, the next scientist in the 16th century, he also has a problem with his collar there, but he's a great, great Christian mind. In addition to being a Christian, he was a German mathematician and astronomer. He was a key figure, listen to this, in the 17th century scientific revolution, and he is best known for his laws of planetary motion. They also used Kepler's calculations to get rockets and so forth into outer space. Today, they still use his laws. He discovered them, folks, without computers, without the internet. This man had a great mind for math. He worked in the field of optics. He invented an improved version of the refracting telescope, and this is what he said, quote, "The goal of all investigation of the external world, in other words, science, the goal of it should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed upon it by God." Science was a window through which Johannes Kepler looked to see how God did it. What are the mechanics and the ways that God maintains the universe? He says, and which God has revealed to us in the language of mathematics. He says geometry is unique and eternal and a reflection from the mind of God. He said that math and geometry, those are God's ideas that he has shared with us. The diversity of the phenomena of nature is so great and the treasures hidden in the heavens are so rich, precisely in order that the human mind shall never be lacking in fresh nourishment. Also a very hungry intellect seeking to glorify God. Robert Boyle, He doesn't have a collar problem. I think he has a wig problem there. But it was the fashionable thing of his day. 17th century, he was a natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, and inventor. But he was also noted for his writings in Christian theology. You can see a copy of that in the picture down below. Boyle is regarded today as the first modern chemist, and he is one of the founders of modern chemistry. Boyle's laws, particularly his gas laws, are extremely important. Even today in the Navy, I was in a dive school in the Navy, and guess what you learn in the second phase of your dive training? Boyle's gas laws. He said this, quote, "Neither the fundamental doctrine of Christianity nor that of the powers and effects of matter and motion seems to be more than an epicycle of the great and universal system of God's contrivances. And it makes but a part of the more general theory of things knowable by the light of nature, improved by the information of the Scriptures." And later on, he says, "Whose objects I conceive to be the natural counsels and the works of God, so far as they are discoverable by us in this life." Robert Boyle, a great scientist. Next one is James Clerk Maxwell from the 19th century. He was a Scottish physicist and mathematician. His most prominent achievement was formulating classical electromagnetic theory. What's electromagnetism? Well, it's one of the four fundamental forces that govern our universe: gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear force. Guess who discovered at least two of those fundamental forces? Christians. Isaac Newton discovered gravity, and electromagnetism was James Clerk Maxwell. His theory united all previous observations, experiments, and equations of electricity, magnetism, and optics into one consistent theory. This achievement has been called the greatest achievement in physics since Isaac Newton's discoveries. This was a great, great man. He says, "I believe that man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever." That's taken right out of the Westminster Catechism. "Almighty God, who has created man in thine own image and made him a living soul that he might seek after thee and have dominion over thy creatures," he says, "teach us to study the works of your hands." In other words, teach us how to study creation and science and nature. Why? So that we may subdue the earth to our use and we may strengthen our reason for your service. That's James Clerk Maxwell. Michael Faraday, one of my heroes in the 18th century. He was a scientist and a chemist, a physicist and a philosopher who greatly contributed to the fields of electromagnetism and electrochemistry. You can see the picture of the battery in the lower left-hand corner of the big picture because Michael Faraday, a lot of his discoveries had to do with electrochemistry and the battery. Although he received little formal education, this man was self-taught, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't go to college. He didn't go to the university. He had an insatiable appetite for learning and for books, and he was what they call an automath, a self-taught learner, and he became one of the most influential scientists in all of history. Albert Einstein kept a picture of Faraday on his study wall next to the picture of Isaac Newton. So this was a great scientist. He said, or it said at the bottom, "Biographers have noted a strong sense of the unity of God and nature pervaded Faraday's life and work." So Faraday was consumed with how God and creation were intimately connected. He's a very devout Christian man. Baron Kelvin, the 19th century. Kelvin, now some people call him Lord Kelvin, was a mathematical physicist and engineer. As a Christian, he did important work in the mathematical analysis of electricity and the formulation of the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And he helped develop physics into its modern form. And he is known for realizing that there was a lower limit to temperature, absolute zero, discovered by a Christian, ladies and gentlemen. Lord Kelvin said this: "The more thoroughly I conduct scientific research, the more I believe that science excludes atheism." Somebody should Twitter that and send it to Richard Dawkins, that science excludes atheism. The atheistic idea is so nonsensical that I cannot put it into words. Creative power is the only feasible answer to the origin of life from a scientific perspective, not just a religious perspective, a scientific perspective. The more I conduct scientific research, the more I believe that science excludes atheism. And then he says, "Don't be afraid to be free thinkers. If you think strongly enough, you will be forced by science to the belief in God, which is the foundation of all religion. You will find science not antagonistic, but helpful to religion." And finally, Albert Einstein. How could we talk about scientists without the guy with the crazy hair? Albert Einstein, one of the most famous scientists of all times, did you know that Albert Einstein thoroughly and absolutely believed in God's existence? What's his famous equation without looking at the picture? Too late, you already looked. E equals mc squared, right? He's the author of the world's most famous equation, and he was a German-born theoretical physicist who developed the theory of general relativity. That's what the equation is, affecting a revolution in physics. For this achievement, Einstein is often regarded as the father of modern physics. Isaac Newton is the father of physics before, and then there came Albert Einstein. So, ladies and gentlemen, the two greatest physicists of all time are believers in God. One of them is a Christian. Albert Einstein is not a Christian. He's a deist, but nonetheless, he believes in God. Listen to what he said. Science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind. My religion consists of a humble admiration of the illimitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the slight details we are able to perceive with our frail and feeble mind. He said, everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we with our modest powers must feel humble. The scientist's religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. And lastly, I saved the best for last, his most famous quotation, I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. I love being a Christian. I love believing in God because we find ourselves alongside some of the greatest scientists that human history has ever produced. So that's the first reason. The scientific founding fathers, the vast majority of them are blatant Christians or open theists that they believe in God's existence. Reason number two, scientism is a self-defeating idea. Scientism is a self-defeating idea. Well, you may ask, well, what is scientism? Now, let me just make a distinction here, okay? Not science, scientism. This is a particular perspective of science. It is the perspective of science that Richard Dawkins holds, and even without saying it, it is probably the majority perspective of most professors and students today. It's the idea that states only those things which can be proven by scientific methods are true. And it contradicts itself. It contradicts its own standard. It's a self-defeating statement. So you may ask, well, what's a self-defeating idea? Well, let's have a little bit of fun here, okay? These are some self-defeating ideas, and all of them are irrational. For example, if somebody comes up to you and says, like people tell me this all the time, I can't speak English. I can't speak a word of English. You just did. You just spoke a word of English. You actually spoke about 5 words of English. Or how about this? No sentence is longer than 3 words. Well, your sentence was just longer than 3 words. Or how about, you can't be sure of anything in this life. Are you sure about that? These are all self-defeating ideas. Or how about this? You shouldn't judge people. Are you judging me? So I really would encourage you to develop a critical ear for self-defeating statements. A lot of the dichos, the idioms, the phrases that we use in life, and definitely that are used supposedly against Christianity, they are self-defeating ideas. Self-defeating, self-contradictory, it comes back upon itself and it fails its own test for truth. Some people call this the boomerang test. You know what a boomerang does, right? I mean, I've thrown a couple of good boomerangs in my life. Most of them are kind of porqueria, you know, like a Nerf boomerang. But I've actually thrown a couple of real wooden boomerangs from Australia. And so if I had a boomerang and I had enough room in here, I would never do this with all you guys here, but, you know, they actually hunt kangaroos with boomerangs. Did you know that? So, I mean, you can actually, they're pretty lethal. Anyway, so you throw a boomerang, and what does it do? It comes back to you. That's what happens with these ideas. They make a claim for truth, but it just comes back on itself, and it defeats its own claim for truth. They're self-defeating, self-contradictory, or the technical term is self-stultifying. They don't measure up to their own standard for truth. And as you can see in the picture, nothing is ever written in stone, right? What's the problem there? It happens to be written in stone. So this is the idea. They're just irrational. Well, what are some other self-defeating statements regarding reality, regarding truth? These are ideas that you're going to hear regarding your Christian faith. So please listen up. Develop an ear for this. Someone will come up to you and they'll say, you should just doubt everything. You sit there and you tell them about God, about Jesus, about truth, and they'll just say, you should just doubt everything. Because I'm an agnostic, you should just doubt everything. Everything. So you ask them, do you doubt that? Because if you doubt that, then you shouldn't believe it. If you doubt everything, then doubt your doubts, which means you can believe. So that's a self-defeating statement. Or what about if somebody comes up to you after sharing the truth about God's existence and they say, oh, come on, man. Just leave it alone. Everything's relative. There's no truth, man. Everything's relative. There is no truth. And you say, is that a true statement? Because if that's a true statement, then it's a self-defeating statement. Someone will come up to you when you talk about, let's say, how abortion is wrong, how abortion is not acceptable by God, how it's actually murder, right? Or you talk about some kind of moral value, some right or wrong judgment, and they'll say, there is no right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. And then you can just say, okay, well, so it's not wrong for me to disagree with you then, right? It's not wrong for me then. So these are all self-defeating. And then finally, someone will say, no one has the truth about God. And you ask, is that a truth about God? So these are all just self-defeating ideas. So scientism claims, as we said, only things which can be proven by the scientific methods are true. In other words, if you get in a conversation with a scientist and he'll start telling you certain things, he'll say, listen, if I can't weigh it, put it in a test tube, measure it, see it, and quantify it, it isn't true. You know what the only problem with that idea is? The words that just came out of his mouth about scientism, they cannot be put in a test tube, they can't be weighed or quantified or measured. It doesn't meet its own standard for truth. Do you understand this? It's a self-defeating idea. That whole philosophy of scientism, it fails its own standard, so it's not a good idea to hold. So that's the second reason, that science has not made the belief in God unnecessary. Reason number 3, let's go to the next one, 95% of science is simply irrelevant to belief in God. It just doesn't really come into contact with Christian theology. So you believe, let's say, in the rapture, or you believe that Jesus was sinless, or you believe in the existence of heaven or the existence of hell. You believe that the Holy Spirit can inspire people to write scriptures. Okay, now let me ask you a question. Does the structure of the hemoglobin molecule affect any of those Christian beliefs? No. They're not related at all, right? And so that's what I'm saying. That the vast majority of science, maybe about 95% or so, it doesn't even overlap with our Christian beliefs. Let me give you some examples. Do these scientific facts affect your belief in God? The structure of a water molecule, right? H2O. Does that affect whether you believe that Jesus is the Savior of mankind? No, because I don't really care if there's 2 hydrogen atoms or 20 hydrogen atoms in a water molecule. That doesn't affect it. What about the process of photosynthesis? No, that's fascinating to learn, and I think it does show design, but it doesn't affect whether God exists or doesn't exist. Cell types in the human body or the number of DNA nucleotides, guys, none of these things overlap with Christian theology, and so 95% of science doesn't even overlap. Reason number 4. However, listen to this. This is where it gets important. 5% of science is relevant. 5% of scientific discoveries and research today, it does overlap with Christian doctrine. So there are certain aspects of astronomy, of cosmology, of biology. These do overlap with Christian teaching. And the question needs to be asked, in those areas, has science made it unnecessary to believe in God? Has science eliminated belief in God in those areas where science does overlap with Christian teaching? That's what you have to ask yourself. And actually, no. There's tremendous support scientifically for belief in God in these areas. Let me just give you 3 examples, okay? Number 1, Einstein's equation. Back to Mr. Einstein. His world-famous equation demonstrated that all of space, time, matter, and energy, which that's basically the entire universe, right? Time, space, matter, and energy, had a definite point of beginning in the finite past. It has since become, his equation, has since become the foundational cornerstone for modern physics. Now, let me just tell you something. You probably take this for granted, but the fact that you believe the universe was created, and most people today, even atheists, they understand, or at least they say they do, that the universe had a beginning. It wasn't always like that. Albert Einstein in 1916, when he discovered that, before his discovery, most people believed that the universe was eternal. They believe that the universe has always been here. The universe is all there is. There's no explanation for it. And the universe does not move. It doesn't change. It is static. It's not dynamic. It's static. And that was the prevailing view about the universe from ancient Greek philosophy, from the time before Plato, all the way up until Albert Einstein, that the universe was eternal, it was static, and it never had a beginning. But guess what happens? Albert Einstein, he's fascinated with light and the properties of light, and so through his theories and so forth, he stumbles upon the general theory of relativity and special relativity, and one of many, many things that we learn from E equals mc squared is that the universe had a beginning. It is demonstrable scientifically beyond the shadow of a doubt, and Albert Einstein helped discover that. And it actually made Albert Einstein very uncomfortable. When he discovered it, he actually mathematically wanted to really make sure that was the case because he didn't feel very comfortable with it. But you know what? He accepted it. It has since passed into physics as the cornerstone of modern-day physics. So his equation, this world-famous equation, which has to do with the amount of energy inside of mass, proves the universe had a beginning. So what's the first verse of the Bible? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In modern-day terminology, you could say that in the beginning, God created all space, time, matter, and energy, the triune, all-powerful God. That was written thousands of years before Albert Einstein. But it's been demonstrated to be true. Or what about John 1:1? That in the beginning was the Word, the Logos. That's a word that Greek philosophers used for God, the divine mind, the divine architect behind all of reality. And guess who the Apostle John applied it to? Jesus. That he is the divine Logos, the divine Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things were created through him, and there was not anything that was created that was not created by him. This has been mathematically demonstrated to be true, ladies and gentlemen. It's not really an explosion. It's not really some little pellet out in space that exploded. If anybody explains it to you like that, that's not really reflecting what like the mathematics shows. But what it does show is that at one point there was nothing, and in the next point, time, space, matter, and energy expanded, and it's still expanding today. That's what Albert Einstein demonstrated. So that's evidence number one that points to belief in an all-powerful, super intelligent designer. Evidence number two, besides Einstein's equation, is Hubble's observation. Well, who's Hubble? He's an astronomer. In 1929, at the Mount Wilson Observatory, Edwin Hubble observed that the light from distant galaxies was redshifted, indicating that they were moving away at incredible rates. This led to the discovery that the fabric of the universe itself is expanding. It is therefore not eternal, as had been thought, but rather had a point of beginning in the past. So Edwin Hubble, one of the most famous astronomers in all of history, with that actual telescope at Mount Wilson, he discovered what is portrayed in the other picture, that the universe began out of nothing, but then it's constantly expanding. That's what he discovered by observing the light from galaxies. Think of it like this. This is the picture that astronomers use. Imagine you're blowing up a balloon for your kid at his birthday party, right? Dad, please blow this up for me. And David knows I'm full of hot air, so I have plenty to go around, right? So he asked me to blow up his balloons. And so I begin to blow up this balloon for David. But this is a special balloon. It has buttons attached to the outside of the balloon. So as I begin to blow that balloon up and it inflates and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, what's going to happen to the buttons? They're going to spread further apart from each other as the fabric expands. And that is exactly what is happening to all of the galaxies in the universe. The fabric of space-time is expanding as Einstein predicted and Hubble observed, and the galaxies are moving away from each other. The fabric of space itself is actually expanding. It's called the cosmological constant. It's the speed at which it's expanding. And Edwin Hubble observed it. Now, how does that help us? Well, if the universe is going like this and it's expanding, make it go backwards. And what would happen? It eventually goes down into a single point. And you go beyond that point, and there's nothing. So again, it points to the fact that the universe had a definite point of creation. Out of nothing came all of time, all of space, all of matter, all of energy. What makes more sense? That everything came from nothing, or that everything came from an all-powerful, super-intelligent, divine being? We know him to be God. So that's a second piece of scientific evidence. A third one, and this is the last one, don't worry, universal fine-tuning. Remember Goldilocks? You remember the story of Goldilocks, right? She was a criminal. We tell this story to our children, right? She breaks and enters their house, and she rifles through all their stuff, and then she's hungry because criminal activity gives you an appetite, right? So she goes into their dining room, and then there's the porridge, the oatmeal, the farina, right? The maizena. And so she sits down, and she goes to Papa Bear's bowl, and she says, oh, it's too hot. And then she goes to Mama Bear's bowl, and she says, it's too cold. But then she goes to Baby Bear's porridge, and what does she say? It's just right. Did you know that's what astronomers and cosmologists have discovered about the universe? And they actually call it the Goldilocks principle. The universe is just right. It's just right for life. In other words, if the conditions of the universe were any different, complex, intelligent life would be impossible. The amazing discovery of modern physics is that the laws and the constants that govern the universe are finely balanced on a razor's edge to allow life. And they demonstrate mathematical design. A slight difference in any one of these constants would mean the end of all complex life in the universe. This has come to be known as the fine-tuning of the universe. In other words, scientists observe the universe, and let's say they know that gravity is real, right? Isaac Newton discovers it. But when you analyze gravity, you can figure out that you can give it an actual number. You can assign a mathematical value to gravity. But what have they found out about these numbers? They have found out that those particular numbers have to be finely tuned to one part in a million. And if it was the slightest bit different, guess what would happen? No life would be possible. And it's not just that the force of gravity has to be finely tuned, but all of these other forces. And ladies and gentlemen, there are 30 or so constants that have to be precisely fine-tuned. And get this, not just finely tuned in themselves, they have to be finely tuned in the ratio to one another. In other words, the cosmological constant can only be 0.05% of the gravitational constant. And the gravitational constant has to be the square root 2 of the other one. And you think that happened by accident? You've got to be deceiving yourself. So we also have one more video. I really want to emphasize and give you some word pictures to how amazing this is. So let's just watch this 1.5-minute video about universal fine-tuning of the universe.
The strength of gravity is just one of at least 30 separate parameters that must be finely tuned to produce a life-sustaining universe. Another example is the cosmological constant.
The cosmological constant describes the expansion speed of space in the universe. If space expands too quickly, then the universe will spread out so quickly that material objects can't form. So you can't get stars and galaxies and planets and the types of things that we, of course, take for granted in our universe.
Physicists have determined that the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 part in 100 million billion. Such precision has been compared to traveling hundreds of miles into space, then throwing a dart at the Earth and hitting a bullseye measuring 1/trillionth of an inch in diameter, an area less than the width of a single atom.
just consider those two parameters, gravity and the cosmological constant. Their level of fine-tuning is to a precision of 1 part in 100 million trillion, 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 trillion. I mean, that's like 1 atom in the entire known universe.
So universal fine-tuning is an amazing evidence for God's existence. Coupled with Hubble's observation and Einstein's equation, amazing. And that, of course, has led many agnostic astronomers to say things like this. I'm going to read you some quotes, guys, and these are not Christians. These are agnostics. These are people, these are scientists, world-class scientists who don't really believe in God, but now, through their scientific studies, listen to what these men say. Roger Penrose, a mathematician and author, he said this: I would say the universe has a purpose. It's not there just somehow by chance. Paul Davies, a British astrophysicist, keep in mind, these are not Christians, these are agnostics. I don't think they're going to stay agnostics for long. He said, there is for me powerful evidence there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. George Ellis, a British astrophysicist, said, amazing fine-tuning occurs in the laws that makes this complexity possible. Realization of the complexity is what is accomplished makes it very difficult not to use the word miraculous. Arthur Eddington, another astrophysicist, he says the idea of a universal mind or logos would be, I think, a fairly plausible inference from the present state of scientific theory. That's from an agnostic. Pray for that guy. He's going to get saved pretty soon. Vera Kristiakowski, I say her name's 10 times fast. She goes to MIT. There's actually a student from our church going to MIT. It's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's across the river from Harvard in Cambridge. She said this: the exquisite order displayed by our scientific understanding of the physical world calls for the divine. Richard Dawkins, I don't think that you're correct. He said there is no evidence for the existence of God. These guys would disagree with him. Arno Penzias, who won the Nobel Prize in physics, says this: astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing. One with a very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. And I love this one. I saved it for last. Frank Tipler, professor of mathematical physics, says, from the perspective of the latest physical theories, Christianity is not a mere religion, but an experimentally testable science. That's awesome. I love being a Christian. I just love being a Christian. Reason number 5, last one. Science is just one way of discovering the truth about reality. Science is beautiful. Science is a gift from God. The word science comes from the Latin word scientia, and it means knowledge, right? Science is beautiful. Science is a gift. But it's only one way of understanding this universe that God has made. There are many other methods besides science for learning and discovering truth about life, reality, and existence. So what do I mean? What about beauty? Let me ask you that question. Do you believe that there is such a thing as beauty? People will say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You better be careful with those phrases because a lot of them don't make any sense at all. Well, let me just ask you this. If your child comes, let's say were to come up here on stage and turn on the keyboard and pound on the keys and then go sit down, and then another person comes up and plays Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in D minor, is there a difference? Is one of them objectively beautiful and one of them objectively not? Yes. So definitions are different, but you know what? We all agree that something exists called beauty. Let me ask you this. Can you weigh beauty? Can you put beauty in a test tube? Can you quantify it, measure it? Can you do that? No. But it's something that we believe is real. And so it's an aspect of discovering truth out about the world. Or what about ideas? Do you believe that ideas are true? You're going to think of an idea to answer my question, right? So let me ask you, if I lay down here on the floor and Xavier's in there, so Xavier gets a power saw, and as kind of a Sunday morning science experiment at church, he autopsied my brain. High-pitched drilling sound opens up my cranium, looks inside my gray matter, my brain, right? 3.5 pounds of the most complicated stuff in the universe. Would Xavier have to search for very long until he would actually see my ideas? How long would he have to look for in my brain to find, oh, there's the idea, there's the thought, there's his favorite football team, oh, there goes his favorite color. Are ideas like that? Are ideas something we can put in a jar and measure? No. But we believe that ideas are real. Think of a purple elephant. There, you're thinking of it, right? That's a true idea. Ideas are real. Now, you can't touch them. They're not material, but it's a way that we apprehend truth about reality. What about right and wrong? Moral truth. Do you believe in right or wrong? Even atheists that say that there is no right or wrong, they go home to their children and their wife at nighttime, and they love them, they kiss them, they tuck them into bed. And if someone breaks into their house trying to do harm to their children, they believe in wrong. They do. Even if they say that they do not, when they stand up and give a lecture, when they go home, they show otherwise. But let me ask you that again. What is morality? What are objective moral values? Because you can't touch them. The scientific method won't help you. Do you understand? So science is an avenue of truth, but moral truth, aesthetic truth about beauty, and truth about ideas, these are other forms that we can, other ways we can learn truth about reality. What about your memories? What did you have for breakfast today? What did you eat for lunch yesterday? Now that could be fake. It could be a fake idea. It could be implanted in your brain like the Matrix. But you know what? We believe our memories to be true. We believe in the truth of memories. Again, they are not physical either. What about minds? Look around the room. Do you think that other minds are in this room? I sure hope so, because otherwise I've been wasting my time for about the past hour. But what is a mind? Not a brain. I'm not asking what is a brain. What is a mind? In the Bible, we call this a soul. Medically, they call this consciousness. And ladies and gentlemen, a lot of scientists believe now in consciousness. I talked to a doctor who performed a procedure on me some time ago, and I was nervous. I needed something to talk about, and I talk a lot, as you can see. Talking helps me. So guess what I talked about? The existence of a mind. And he believed in that. He believes in the existence of some type of a consciousness that goes beyond the physical body at the point of death. Science can't weigh consciousness. Science cannot capture your soul and test it. But we believe that that is a truth. We believe that that's a true aspect of reality. What about mathematics or logic? Why do you believe that 2 + 2 = 4? I know you've seen it written down on a piece of paper, but I mean, what is math? Math is immaterial, but it's true. It really, really is true. What about logic? What about truth? What about these rules of thinking that govern our world? They're not physical, ladies and gentlemen, but they are real. They are a part of the reality that God has made. And finally, do you believe in love? Do you believe in love? Even atheists believe in love. Even Richard Dawkins believes in love. But you have two choices. You can either say, if you believe in Scientism, you can say that love is a chemical reaction that happens in your body. Or you can say what we say. You can say love is not just a chemical reaction. There are chemicals produced in my body. I mean, my wife is so attractive, I can't help but have a reaction chemically when she walks by me. I love my wife, you know? Gina's hot. She's beautiful. Sometimes I blush, you know? I'm just joking. She blushes, but I don't usually blush too much. But there's a definite chemical reaction with love. Your pulse quickens. Sometimes you get red, you know, whatever the case may be. But is that all love is? Is love just a chemical squirt in your body? No. Because we would say it's not just material. It's a part of your soul. There's something that happens there, and love is not material. There's a connection to the physical body, and we can see those effects. But love is a real thing, and it can't be captured by science. So that's another fifth reason to believe that science has not eliminated the need for God. Let me just quickly review those 5 reasons. Number 1, the scientific founding fathers, wonderful scientists who have founded science, greater scientists than Richard Dawkins, have founded modern science, and they were Christians or believers in a God. Scientism, the idea that only what you can touch and see and taste and measure through physics or chemistry, that is a self-defeating idea. Number 3, simple irrelevance. Most of science has no connection to Christian teaching. And so therefore, it can't eliminate the belief in God. Strong support. A next reason is 5% of science is relevant, but what did we say? An amazing amount of that science is powerfully and persuasively pointing to God. And the last one, a single perspective. Science is just one of many perspectives that we can use to gather truth about reality. It's valuable, but it's only one method. Finally, as the worship team comes up, we're going to close out. How can this help you in your life? How can this help you? A couple suggestions. As a follower of Christ, you should love and study God's Word, the Scriptures. Guys, you can believe the Bible. All those things in Scripture, the scientific parts, it's not a scientific book, but it's totally scientifically accurate. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that all things were created through Christ, by Him and for Him. You can believe the Bible. It has been verified and confirmed through the best sciences of our day. And that's why 2 Timothy 3:16 says that all Scripture has been given through the inspiration of God. I tested the Bible for 2 years, and you know how many errors I found? 0. In the areas of science, but also history, archaeology, philosophy, so many different areas. And that's why Jesus said in John 17:17, your word is truth. You can trust the Bible. You should love and study God's word, but also you should love and study God's world. Did you know that in Charles Spurgeon's day, they taught that there were 2 books that God has given to us to learn about Him? He's given us the book of Scripture, the book of God's Word, but He's also given us another book, God's world. And they called these the 2 books of Revelation, God's Word and God's world. Special revelation and natural revelation. And together, these give us a well-rounded picture of who God is. So love and study God's world, the sciences. Don't be afraid of science, Christian. Science is awesome. Good science is beautiful. David said in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows forth His handiwork. Day after day they utter speech, and night after night they pour forth knowledge. And David said there is no language or speech on the earth where their message is not heard. Science is a beautiful messenger and testimony to the existence of God, His power, His beauty, His intelligence. And David also said in Psalm 8, when he considered the heavens, the work of God's fingers, he said, what am I that you are mindful of me? There's a lot of Scripture that would point us to have a love and a knowledge of God's world. And then thirdly, if you're a Christian here today, you should love and share with unbelievers what we've talked about. Love and share what you know about the Lord, even if you feel like it's just a little amount. But you know what, guys? People need to know about God. They really, really do. My heart breaks for people like Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins isn't the enemy. Christopher Hitchens, a fire-breathing atheist who just recently passed away from cancer of the esophagus, he wasn't the enemy. Christopher was someone's boy. Christopher was someone's child one day. Maybe he even went to Sunday school, who knows? And he grew up to be one of the most God-hating atheists in the world. I feel so bad for these people because a lot of them are trapped and they just need help. Pray for them, love them, but also share with them. Share with people at your job. Share with people in your family. Like we said, get together with someone today. It's Earth Day. Earth Day 2012. Yippee. Talk about who created the earth. Talk about how things from science point back to the Creator. And finally, if you're here this morning, maybe not, but there might be a couple of you here today who you're still seeking after truth. You're not a Christian. And I'm super glad you're here with us today. If that's the case, I would just encourage you to do a very good, thorough investigation. Follow the evidence wherever it leads and learn about the Lord. Learn about the good evidence that exists for God's existence, for the truth of the Christian worldview. And on the edge of that slide over there, if you want some more resources, we do have a couple of resources from Calvary Chapel that can help you. There's a website, Intelligent Faith 315. There's articles, videos, and conversations that go on there. There's a YouTube channel called Intelligent Faith also. It's all just videos about this type of stuff, scientific and other evidence pointing to God. And there's also a podcast on iTunes called Caruso about sharing your faith and also learning how to defend your faith with evidence. If you're seeking after truth, those are some good resources to check out. So if the worship team is close by, then we will close out in worship. I don't know if they're in the back room there. Are they? Yep, I just heard the door close, so they're coming up. Let's close out in prayer, guys. Why don't we stand and we'll close out in prayer. Thank you, dear Jesus. Thank you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, for your goodness. Thank you for your grace. And thank you, Lord, that you love us so much that you've revealed yourself powerfully through the Word of God, but also through your world. Lord, it's so obvious, as Paul said, made. We can see your eternal power and your existence, God. Lord, I just pray that you'd help us to have good answers for ourselves, for our kids as they grow up and ask us, but also for the people you've put in our lives, Lord, that you love and we love them too. Help us to equip ourselves to reach out with the truth. In your name we pray. Amen. God bless you.